Marcus, move, now. The teacher's voice cut through the classroom like a snapped ruler. Every head turned. Every pencil froze. 8-year-old Marcus Hill sat stiff in his chair, his small hands gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. His eyes darted around the room, searching for help that wasn't coming. "Yes, you," Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker snapped, tapping the chalk against the blackboard. "Don't just sit there staring. Take your things and go." A few kids snickered. One boy in the back whispered, "Told you." Marcus swallowed. Where do I go, ma'am?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Whitaker didn't hesitate. "You know exactly where. The desk by the window. Alone." The room shifted. That desk had been empty for weeks, shoved against the far wall, half in shadow, separated from the others like it carried a disease. Marcus stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor louder than it should have. He gathered his worn notebook, the one with the frayed corners, and his pencil, the same pencil he sharpened too often because it made him feel prepared. As he walked, someone stuck out a foot. He stumbled, but didn't fall. Laughter rippled through the room. "Eyes forward," Mrs. Whitaker barked, though her lips twitched with irritation, not concern. "This is a classroom, not a playground." Marcus reached the desk. It wobbled when he touched it. The window beside him rattled faintly, letting in cold November air that smelled like wet leaves and asphalt. Outside, kids on the playground laughed freely, their voices floating in like a cruel reminder of what he wasn't allowed to have. He sat, alone, again. This wasn't the first time, but today felt different. Today something broke. Mrs. Whitaker turned back to the board, writing out math problems in sharp, aggressive strokes. "Now, class," she said briskly, "we will continue without disruptions." Marcus stared at the chalk dust drifting through the air, tiny white particles catching the light. He wondered if anyone noticed how quiet he was now. No talking, no moving, no breathing too loud. That's what she wanted, wasn't it? He pressed his lips together, holding back the heat building behind his eyes. Across the aisle, a girl named Emily glanced at him, her face tight with something like guilt. She looked away quickly when Mrs. Whitaker turned. Marcus had learned that look. It meant, "I'm sorry, but I won't help you." Mrs. Whitaker had been teaching for over 20 years. She believed in discipline, structure, order, and Marcus, in her mind, disrupted all three. He asked too many questions. He finished assignments too fast and then tapped his pencil. He hummed quietly when he thought, and worst of all, he didn't blend in. Marcus, she had once told another teacher in the hallway, not knowing he was within earshot, is a good kid, but he needs to learn his place. He never forgot those words. The clock ticked loudly. Every second stretched. When Marcus raised his hand, slowly, carefully, Mrs. Whitaker didn't even look at him. "Yes, Jason?" she said instead. Jason smirked, answering confidently. Marcus lowered his hand. Again. His stomach growled softly. He hadn't eaten breakfast. His mom worked nights and had slept through the alarm. He didn't blame her. He never did. At lunch, things got worse. As the bell rang, chairs scraped back and kids rushed for the door. Marcus stood, hoping, once, someone might walk with him. "Marcus," Mrs. Whitaker called sharply. He froze. "Yes, ma'am? You'll be eating lunch here today." The room went silent. "For why?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Whitaker didn't hesitate. "You know exactly where. The desk by the window. Alone." The door shut behind the other students. The hallway noise faded. Marcus sat back down at the isolated desk, the classroom suddenly enormous and empty. Mrs. Whitaker returned to her paperwork, heels clicking, never looking at him again. He ate his lunch alone. A bruised apple, a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one cared. By the time the final bell rang that day, Marcus felt smaller than he ever had before. He walked home slowly, shoulders hunched, backpack heavier than books. When he opened the apartment door, his mother looked up from the couch, worry instantly creasing her face. "Baby?" she asked. "What happened?" Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing," he said. And that was the moment something important was taken from him. Not his seat, not his lunch, not his pride, but his voice. Mrs. Eleanor Whitaker erased the board at the end of the day, chalk dust settling like snow. She never noticed the small handprint left on the isolated desk, and she had no idea that years later she would remember that desk and that boy with a regret that would keep her awake at night.
Marcus stopped raising his hand after that day. At first, it was subtle, a hesitation, a pause where his arm would lift halfway, then fall back to the desk as if weighed down by something invisible. Mrs. Whitaker didn't notice, or if she did, she didn't comment. To her, a quiet Marcus was a fixed Marcus. That's what she wanted. Order. But silence, when forced on a child, doesn't create obedience. It creates distance. Weeks passed, then months. The desk by the window became his desk permanently. No explanation was ever given to the class. No conversation, no correction. Just quiet acceptance, the most dangerous kind. Other children learned quickly. If Marcus was separate, then he must be different. If he was different, then he must be lesser. And if the teacher allowed it, then so could they. It started small. A chair pulled away when he tried to sit nearby, whispers when he walked past, a nickname scribbled on a notebook and quickly erased before an adult could see. Window boy, shadow. One afternoon, as Marcus reached for a crayon during art class, another child knocked it off the table. "Oops," the boy said, not sounding sorry at all. Marcus bent down to pick it up. "Marcus," Mrs. Whitaker snapped from across the room, "we don't crawl around during class." His cheeks burned. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered. She didn't say a word to the other child. That was the lesson. Marcus learned it well. At home, his mother, Denise Hill, noticed the change. He talked less. He laughed less. He spent hours sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, lining up toy cars in careful rows, perfectly spaced, perfectly quiet. "School okay?" she asked one night, stirring a pot of beans on the stove. "Yeah," Marcus said. She studied him. Mothers always know. But Denise was tired, bone-deep tired. 2 jobs, 1 paycheck never quite enough. A son she loved more than her own breath, but didn't always know how to protect from a world that seemed determined to harden him early. So she trusted the school. She trusted the teacher. After all, Mrs. Whitaker had been there forever. She had awards on the wall. Parents spoke her name with respect. Who was Denise Hill to question that? By 3rd grade, Marcus was invisible. Not the loud kind of invisible that gets noticed, the quiet kind. The kind where teachers forget to call on you. The kind where classmates forget to invite you. The kind where you start believing that maybe you don't matter enough to be included. He stopped turning in homework on time. Not because he didn't understand it, he did, but because something inside him whispered, "Why bother?" Once, during a group project, Mrs. Whitaker assigned teams. "Jason, Emily, Sarah, you'll work together." Names were called, chairs moved, groups formed. Marcus waited. "And Marcus," she said finally, barely glancing up, "you'll work independently." The word landed heavy. Independently. As if he had chosen this, as if it were a privilege. The other kids avoided his eyes. He worked alone again, his paper filled neatly, answers correct. When he turned it in, Mrs. Whitaker nodded once. Good. That single word should have felt like something. It didn't. By 5th grade, Marcus had learned how to disappear without leaving. He didn't cause trouble, he didn't ask for help, he didn't expect kindness. He survived school the way some kids survive storms, hunched down, waiting for it to pass. One afternoon during recess, a group of boys blocked his path. "You think you're better than us?" one asked. Marcus shook his head. "You don't talk, you don't play, you think you're special." "I just want to go inside," Marcus said quietly. A shove sent him stumbling. He hit the ground hard, palms scraping against concrete. Laughter erupted. A whistle blew. Mrs. Whitaker stood at the edge of the playground, arms crossed. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "He tripped," Jason said quickly. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. He had learned what happened when he spoke. Mrs. Whitaker looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in weeks. "Well?" she asked. Marcus stared at the ground. "It was my fault," he whispered. She nodded once. "Be more careful." And that was that. That night, Marcus stared at the ceiling of his small bedroom, listening to the hum of traffic outside. He wondered what he had done wrong. He replayed every moment, every word, every look. He wondered if being quiet would make it stop. He wondered if being invisible would make it safer. What he didn't know, what no one bothered to tell him, was that he was being shaped, not by cruelty alone, but by neglect. Years later, Eleanor Whitaker would sit alone in her tidy living room, surrounded by plaques and framed class photos. She would remember Marcus Hill, not because he caused trouble, but because he hadn't. She would remember the desk by the window, the silence, the way he stopped raising his hand. And for the first time, she would ask herself a question she had never allowed before. What did my classroom take from that boy? And would it ever give it back?
Middle school didn't change Marcus Hill. It confirmed him. By the time he walked through the rusted blue doors of Roosevelt Middle, he already knew how to survive without being seen. He kept his shoulders slightly hunched, eyes lower just enough to avoid attention, voice soft enough that teachers rarely had to shush him. He wasn't defiant, he wasn't disruptive, he was convenient. And in a system stretched thin, convenience often meant neglect. The seating charts followed him. Last row, corner desks, near windows or doors, places where teachers could glance past him without really looking. Marcus noticed. He noticed everything. He noticed how substitute teachers mispronounced his name and didn't bother correcting it, how hall monitors watched him longer than other kids, how security guards followed him with their eyes when he passed between classes. No one ever said anything out loud. They didn't have to. The message was constant and quiet. Be careful. Be small. Be ready to explain yourself. At lunch, Marcus sat alone again. Not because there weren't empty seats, because whenever he approached a table, conversation slowed, then stopped. He learned to eat quickly, head down, backpack hugged close. One day, a milk carton exploded across his tray. "Oops," someone snickered. Marcus wiped it up himself. The aide never looked up from her clipboard. At home, Denise tried. She really did. "How was school?" she asked every night. "Fine," Marcus said every night. She worked late, she slept hard. She trusted that silence meant safety. But silence doesn't mean safety. It means endurance. By 7th grade, Marcus discovered the library, not for the books at first, for the quiet, for the way no one asked questions, for the way being alone there felt like a choice. He found solace in biographies, people who had been overlooked, dismissed, doubted, men who grew up poor, women told they didn't belong, names history tried to forget. He learned something important. Being unseen didn't mean being empty, it meant being unmeasured. And if the world wasn't measuring him, then he could define himself quietly, carefully, on his own terms. He started writing, nothing fancy, just words in a cheap spiral notebook he kept hidden under his mattress. Thoughts, observations, questions he was afraid to ask out loud. Why did teachers smile at some kids and watch others like suspects? Why does silence feel safer than honesty? Why do people only notice you when they expect you to fail? One afternoon, his English teacher, Mr. Lawson, assigned a personal essay. "Write about a moment that changed you," he said. Marcus hesitated, then wrote everything. Not names, not accusations, just the feeling. The desk by the window, the quiet, the way being separated made him feel smaller every day. When he turned it in, he expected nothing. He was wrong. 2 days later, Mr. Lawson called him after class. Marcus's heart pounded. Had he said too much? "Marcus," Mr. Lawson said gently, holding the paper, "did you really write this?" "Yes, sir." "It's honest," the teacher said, "painfully honest." Marcus waited for the but. It didn't come. "You have a voice, a strong one. You just haven't been encouraged to use it." Marcus swallowed. No teacher had ever said that to him, not once. "I'd like you to join the writing club," Mr. Lawson said. Marcus stared. "There's no tryout," the man added, "just words." That day, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to matter. Writing became Marcus's refuge, his resistance, his proof that silence had not taken everything from him. But outside that classroom, the world didn't soften. By 8th grade, a security incident shook the school. A phone went missing. Marcus was questioned, not because anyone saw him take it, but because he had been nearby. The assistant principal sat him down, voice clipped. "Do you have anything to tell us?" "No, sir." "Are you sure?" "Yes." They searched his backpack, found nothing, let him go. No apology, no explanation, just a look that said, "We were watching you anyway." That night, Marcus wrote until his fingers cramped. Not out of anger, out of resolve. He promised himself something then. They will never decide who I am. High school came with new hallways, new teachers, new rules, but old assumptions. Guidance counselors steered him towards practical options. "College can be expensive," one said kindly. "You might want to consider trade programs." Marcus nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't explain that his grades were strong, that his essays were winning small contests online under a pseudonym, that he had dreams bigger than survival. He learned early that sometimes it's better to let people underestimate you. It gives you room. By senior year, Marcus stood on the edge of two worlds, one that expected him to disappear quietly, and one he was building word by word. On graduation day, as he crossed the stage, applause was polite, nothing special. Denise cried anyway. "You did it," she whispered, hugging him tight. Marcus smiled, but he knew. The hardest part wasn't behind him. It was waiting. And somewhere, far away, a retired teacher named Eleanor Whitaker was living her quiet life, unaware that a boy she once moved to the corner desk was about to remind the world what silence can become when it finally learns to speak.
Time did what it always does. It moved on, indifferent, relentless, carrying Marcus Hill forward, whether the past was ready or not. By the time he turned 34, Marcus had become a name people recognized, not because he chased attention, because his words found people who had been waiting to be seen. His essays, once scribbled in a spiral notebook under a mattress, now appeared in national publications. His memoir, The Quiet Row, sat on bestseller lists for weeks, praised for its restraint, its honesty, its refusal to sensationalize pain. Reviewers called it measured. Readers called it truth. Teachers called it uncomfortable. Marcus lived simply despite the success, a modest home,
Early mornings, long walks, a habit of listening more than speaking. But the past has a way of circling back when it's ready to be acknowledged. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was scrolling through emails when one subject line made his fingers still. Invitation, Roosevelt Elementary 50-year Anniversary Assembly. He stared at the sender. Roosevelt Elementary School, the place where silence had been assigned to him like a seat number. The email was polite, formal, almost cheerful. They wanted him as a featured speaker. A proud alumnus, it said. Marcus leaned back slowly. He hadn't stepped inside that building in over 25 years, hadn't spoken the name Eleanor Whitaker out loud in nearly as long. And yet, there it was. The invitation sat unanswered for days. At night, memories surfaced, uninvited. The scrape of chair legs, the whispering laughter, the way being moved away from classmates made him feel contagious. He remembered Mrs. Whitaker's voice, calm, controlled, final. "Marcus, you'll sit here from now on." He wondered if she remembered. Across town, Eleanor Whitaker lived a quiet life, 72 years old, retired, widowed. Her home smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old books. Framed photos lined the mantel, students holding certificates, class portraits, thank you notes written in careful cursive. She believed she had been a good teacher, firm but fair. She watched the news in the evenings, tutted at the state of education, and believed deeply in structure. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she overheard a familiar name on a talk show. Author Marcus Hill, whose latest book explores isolation and resilience in American classrooms. Eleanor froze. The screen showed a composed black man in a gray blazer, his voice calm, eyes thoughtful. Something about him tugged at her memory. The host asked, "You write about being separated in school. Do you think teachers realize the long-term impact of those decisions?" Marcus paused. "I think most don't," he said evenly, "but that doesn't erase the impact." Eleanor's heart thumped. The name, the eyes, the age. She sank into her chair. That night, she dug through old boxes in her closet, class rosters, yearbooks, yellowed lesson plans with time. Then she found it, a second-grade seating chart, her handwriting, Marcus Hill, circled, desk moved to corner. A reason scribbled in the margin, disruptive influence. Her breath caught. She didn't remember writing that, didn't remember why, but she remembered the boy now. Quiet, observant, always alone. A memory surfaced, not of disruption, but of discomfort. Parents complaining, other children whispering, a desire to restore order. She had told herself she was being fair. She hadn't questioned why order always seemed to require removal. The next morning, Eleanor received the same email Marcus had, the anniversary assembly, and a note at the bottom. "We're honored to announce that best-selling author Marcus Hill will be joining us as a keynote speaker." Eleanor's hands trembled. The silence she had imposed all those years ago was about to speak, publicly. Marcus accepted the invitation 2 days before the event, not out of spite, out of necessity. The auditorium smelled the same. Old wood, dust, chalk. Parents filled the seats. Teachers chatted nervously. Former students mingled with nostalgia and coffee cups. Marcus stood backstage adjusting his microphone. He wasn't angry, but he wasn't calm either. He was resolved. When his name was announced, the applause was warm, respectful. He walked to the podium slowly, looked out, saw faces that mirrored the system he'd grown up under. He began softly. "I was 7 years old when I learned that silence could be assigned." The room stilled. "I didn't understand it then. I thought I'd done something wrong. I spent years trying to behave my way back into belonging." He didn't name anyone. He didn't accuse. He described the loneliness, the shrinking, The way being moved away from classmates made him feel contagious. He remembered Mrs. Whitaker's voice, calm, controlled, final. "Marcus, you'll sit here from now on." Teachers shifted in their seats. Parents frowned. Others nodded.
Marcus continued. "I don't believe most harm comes from cruelty," he said. "I believe it comes from convenience, from decisions made quickly and never revisited." In the third row, Eleanor Whitaker sat rigid. Every word landed like a mirror. He closed with something simple. If you ever moved a child away from others because it made the room easier, I hope you also ask yourself what it made that child carry. The applause was long, heavy, uncomfortable. Afterward, a line formed, people thanking him, asking for signatures. Then Eleanor stood in front of him, older, smaller, hands clasped tight. "Marcus," she said softly. He looked at her. Recognition flickered, then settled. "Yes, ma'am?" "I was your second-grade teacher," she said. "Eleanor Whitaker." He nodded. "I know." She swallowed. "I didn't realize what I took from you." Marcus studied her. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, calmly, "You didn't take my voice." Her eyes filled. "But you taught me how easy it is for others to try." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not defensively, not to be forgiven, just honestly. Marcus exhaled. "So am I," he said. They stood there, not reconciled, not absolved, but aware. And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't punishment, it was understanding. The applause from the auditorium faded, but the echo of Marcus Hill's words didn't. Not for the teachers who returned to their classrooms the next morning with tight smiles and restless hands. Not for the parents who drove home in silence, glancing at their children in the rearview mirror, wondering what they might have missed. And certainly not for Roosevelt Elementary. Within hours of the assembly, clips of Marcus's speech began circulating online. Someone had recorded it on a phone, shaky but clear enough. The title that spread with it was simple and devastating. I was assigned silence. By the next day, it had been shared tens of thousands of times. Former students commented first. "I sat alone, too. This happened to my brother. I thought it was just me." Teachers commented next, cautiously. "Classroom management is complex. We did what we were trained to do. This is being taken out of context." And then came the backlash. Some accused Marcus of exaggeration. Others said he was reopening old wounds for attention. A few insisted that discipline was necessary and that children were too sensitive now. Marcus read the comments quietly. He didn't respond. He'd learned long ago that defensiveness speaks louder than denial. Across town, Eleanor Whitaker watched the storm unfold from our living room. The same hands that once arranged seating charts now trembled as she scrolled. Her name hadn't been mentioned, not yet, but she felt exposed anyway. She thought of the boy she'd moved to the corner, how she'd told herself it was temporary, how temporary had quietly become permanent. That night, she couldn't sleep. She rose before dawn, brewed tea, and sat at her kitchen table staring at a yellow legal pad. She wrote one sentence, then crossed it out. She wrote another. Nothing felt sufficient. Meanwhile, Roosevelt Elementary issued a statement. It was carefully worded, polished, legal. "We acknowledge the emotional experiences shared at our recent anniversary event. While classroom practices have evolved over time, Roosevelt Elementary remains committed to fostering inclusive learning environments." It said nothing about harm, nothing about accountability, nothing about Marcus. Parents noticed, teachers noticed, students noticed, and Marcus noticed too. He received an email from a producer at a national morning show.
then another from a podcast, then a call from a university. People are listening, his editor said, whether they want to or not. Marcus agreed to one interview, just one. He sat under studio lights, hands folded, voice steady. The host asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Are you asking for an apology from your former teacher?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "No," he said. "I'm asking for reflection. Apologies come after understanding, not before." The clip went viral. Across social media, the debate intensified. Some teachers felt attacked, others felt seen. Many older educators, especially those nearing retirement, felt something heavier, a reckoning. In staff lounges and teacher forums, stories surfaced. "I used to separate the kids who didn't fit. I told myself it was for the greater good. I never checked if it actually helped." At Roosevelt Elementary, faculty meetings grew tense. Younger teachers asked questions, veterans crossed their arms, and administrators avoided eye contact. The school board scheduled a closed-door session. Outside the building, parents gathered, not in anger, but in quiet insistence. They wanted answers. They wanted policies reviewed. They wanted assurance that no child would be made to feel disposable for the sake of order. Eleanor Whitaker watched footage of the meeting on the local news. Her chest tightened. She recognized the tone. Minimizing, reframing, protecting legacy. She had used that tone herself for years. That afternoon, she made a decision. She called Marcus. He answered on the third ring. "Yes," he said, cautious but polite. "It's Eleanor Whitaker," she said. I don't expect you to want to hear from me." He paused. "I'm listening," he said. "I've been watching what's happening, and I realize that staying silent now would be the same mistake all over again." She inhaled shakily. "I want to write a letter, publicly, not to defend myself, but to tell the truth." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "Why?" he asked. "Because I don't want comfort to matter more than accountability anymore," she said. There was a long silence. Then Marcus spoke. "If you're doing it to clear your conscience, don't. I'm doing it because I failed, and because I don't want the next child to carry what you carried." He nodded, though he couldn't see it. "Then write it, but don't make it about redemption. Make it about responsibility." She agreed. The letter was published 3 days later, not on a school website, not behind a paywall, on the front page of the local paper. The headline read, "I thought I was maintaining order. I was wrong." Eleanor wrote plainly. She described her intentions and their consequences. She named the practice, she named herself, and she named the harm. "I did not strike a child. I did not raise my voice, but I isolated him, and isolation can bruise just as deeply." The response was immediate. Some praised her courage, others condemned her. A few former colleagues called her disloyal. She accepted it all. Marcus read the letter once, then again. He didn't cry, he didn't smile, he simply sat with it. For the first time, the narrative wasn't fighting him, it was standing beside him. That evening, he received a message from a parent. "My son came home today and told his teacher moved him closer to other kids instead of away. She said she didn't want anyone feeling invisible." Marcus stared at the screen. The silence he'd been forced into was finally being answered, not with noise, but with change. And that, he knew, was louder than any apology.
Change never arrives quietly. It doesn't knock, it doesn't ask permission, and it almost always makes people uncomfortable before it makes anything better. By the second week after Marcus Hill's speech, the conversation had shifted. It was no longer just about one boy, one classroom, one teacher. It was about systems, and systems do not like to be questioned. Across the district, administrators began holding listening sessions. That was the phrase they used, listening. though much of the talking still came from the same voices that had always filled the room. Veteran teachers expressed frustration. "We're being judged by today's standards for yesterday's practices. You can't manage a classroom without consequences. Kids need structure, not feelings." Younger educators pushed back. "Structure doesn't require isolation. Discipline shouldn't mean erasure. Order shouldn't come at the cost of dignity." The divide wasn't just generational, it was philosophical, and it ran deep. Marcus watched from a distance as his name became shorthand in debates he never asked to start. The Marcus Hill effect, some called it. Others were less kind. Agenda-driven, anti-teacher, revisionist. A radio host mocked him on air. "Back in my day, sitting alone built character," the man laughed. "Now it's trauma." The laughter stung, not because it was new, but because it was familiar. Marcus had heard versions of it his entire life. The minimization, the dismissal, the insistence that harm only counted if it looked dramatic enough. But this time, something was different. People were listening anyway. At Roosevelt Elementary, the cost became personal. Teachers who had spoken up in favor of revisiting discipline practices found themselves quietly sidelined. Classroom resources delayed, schedules reshuffled, performance reviews suddenly under reconsideration. No one said it was punishment, but everyone understood the message. Fall in line. Eleanor Whitaker felt it too. Former colleagues stopped calling. A few crossed the street when they saw her at the grocery store. One handwritten note arrived in her mailbox. "You betrayed the profession." She read it once, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. She didn't regret the letter, but she was learning the price of honesty late in life. Meanwhile, Marcus received an invitation from the district superintendent. A private meeting. Just to talk, the email said. Marcus almost declined. He'd learned that just to talk often meant just to soften. But he went anyway. The office was spacious, neutral, designed to feel calm. The superintendent smiled warmly. "We admire your passion," she said, "but there's concern about how this narrative is being framed." Marcus waited. "There's fear," she continued, "that this is turning into an indictment of teachers as individuals." Marcus nodded slowly. "I've never named anyone. I've described experiences." "Yes, but experiences can feel accusatory." "Truth often does," he replied evenly. She leaned forward. "What would you like to see happen?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I want schools to stop confusing silence with success, and I want teachers to ask themselves why removal is so often the first solution, especially for children who already feel out of place." The superintendent exhaled. "That's complex." "So is harm," Marcus said. The meeting ended politely. Nothing was promised, nothing was denied. But when Marcus left the building, he knew something important had happened. They hadn't dismissed him, they hadn't silenced him. They were uncomfortable, and discomfort was movement. Still, the backlash followed him home. An email arrived late one night. "You think you're helping, but you're tearing down the people who tried to help you." Marcus stared at the screen. For a moment, doubt crept in, the old familiar voice whispering that maybe he was asking for too much, that maybe it was easier to stay quiet. Then he remembered being 7, remembered the chair in the corner, remembered how no one had asked if he was okay. He typed a response, then deleted it. He didn't need to explain himself anymore. Across the country, teachers began reaching out privately. "I've been doing this for 20 years. Your words made me rethink everything. I moved a child back into a group today. It felt small, but right. I wish someone had said this when I was starting out." Marcus saved those messages, not for validation, for resolve. But the loudest response came from students, former and current. A high school senior wrote, "I didn't realize being ignored wasn't my fault until I heard you speak." A college freshman said, "I finally understood why I sit in the back and stay quiet."
A middle schooler wrote in careful, uncertain sentences, "My teacher moved my desk today. I'm not alone anymore." Marcus read that one twice. Then he closed his laptop and sat in the quiet. The cost of telling the truth was real: reputation, peace, anonymity. But so was the cost of staying silent, and he had paid that once already, with years of self-doubt and shrinking. He wouldn't pay it again. That weekend, Eleanor attended a small community forum on education. She sat in the back, unnoticed. A young teacher spoke passionately about inclusive classrooms. A parent asked how schools could do better. For the first time in decades, Eleanor didn't feel like an authority in the room. She felt like a witness, and oddly, that felt right. After the forum, she approached the young teacher. "I taught for 40 years, Eleanor said softly, "and I wish I'd listened more." The teacher smiled gently. "We're all still learning," she said. Eleanor nodded. "Yes, even now, especially now." The reckoning wasn't over. It was only changing shape, and Marcus knew the next phase wouldn't be public speeches or viral clips. It would be quieter, harder, more personal, because systems don't collapse in one moment. They change one choice at a time. And in classrooms across the country, those choices were finally being questioned.
Justice didn't arrive with applause. There were no ceremonies, no official apologies broadcast on the evening news, no sweeping policy reform announced with triumphant language. Instead, justice crept in quietly, into rooms most people never saw. It arrived in classrooms where desks were moved closer together instead of farther apart, in teachers who paused before writing a child's name on the board under discipline, in administrators who began asking why before deciding what. Marcus Hill noticed these changes not through headlines, but through people. A third-grade teacher from Ohio emailed him one morning. "I had a boy who reminded me of you, quiet, polite, always alone. I realized I'd mistaken his silence for coping. Today, I sat beside him during reading. He smiled for the first time this year." Marcus stared at the message longer than he meant to. Another message came from a principal in Georgia. "We're piloting restorative circles instead of isolation. It's messy, it's uncomfortable, but it feels human." Human. That word followed Marcus everywhere now. It was what his childhood classroom had lacked, and what he was determined to protect for the next generation. But while the world shifted slowly, Marcus faced something harder: himself. Success hadn't erased the old instincts. He still chose seats near exits, still lowered his voice in meetings, still waited for permission that no one was withholding. Trauma, he learned, doesn't disappear just because it's named. It lingers. So Marcus began therapy, not because he was broken, but because he deserved healing. In one session, the therapist asked gently, "When did you learn to make yourself small?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He pictured the desk by the window, the way the light fell across it every morning, the way it felt safer to disappear than to be noticed. "I think," he said slowly, "when being quiet felt like the only way to survive." The therapist nodded. "And now?" Marcus exhaled. "Now, I'm learning that taking up space doesn't make me wrong." That realization didn't come all at once. It came in moments. The first time he interrupted someone who spoke over him. The first time he said no without apologizing. The first time he allowed himself to be proud. Not defiant, not defensive, just proud. Meanwhile, Eleanor Whitaker watched from a distance. She followed Marcus's work quietly, reading articles, watching panels. She never commented publicly. She didn't feel it was her place. But one afternoon, she found herself standing outside Roosevelt Elementary. the building where she'd taught for nearly 4 decades. The playground was empty. The windows reflected the sky. She walked slowly along the brick wall, fingertips brushing the familiar texture. So many children had passed through these halls, so many moments she'd forgotten, and a few she never would. Inside, a custodian recognized her. "Mrs. Whitaker," he asked, "you visiting?" "Just remembering," she replied. She stood in the doorway of an empty classroom. Different furniture, new posters, but the same bones. She walked to the corner near the window. There was no desk there now. The space was open. Eleanor sat in one of the small chairs and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply allowed herself to feel, something she hadn't always permitted. Later that week, Marcus received a handwritten letter. No return address. The writing was careful, deliberate. "Mr. Hill, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect understanding. But I want you to know that I see now what I failed to see then. I confused control with care, silence with success. You deserved better. I'm sorry. W.E." Marcus read it twice, then a third time. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel anger. He felt something softer. Release. Not because the apology fixed the past, but because it acknowledged it. He folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to dwell on it, but to remember. That winter, Marcus returned to his mother's hometown for the holidays. He visited his mother's grave, brushing snow from the headstone. "I'm doing okay," he said quietly. "I wish you could see it." In the silence, he imagined her smile. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't. That evening, he attended a small community event at the local library. No cameras, no speeches, just parents, teachers, kids. He sat in a folding chair and listened. A young boy raised his hand during the discussion. "I used to sit alone, but now I don't." The room fell quiet. "Why?" someone asked gently. "Because my teacher asked me what I needed." Marcus swallowed hard. That was it. That was justice. Not revenge, not humiliation. Understanding. He realized then that what had been taken from him as a child, connection, voice, belonging, couldn't be returned in the same form, but it could be rebuilt elsewhere, in others, in the future. When Marcus left the library that night, snow falling softly around him, he felt lighter than he had in years. Not because the pain was gone, but because it no longer owned him. Justice, he learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a chair moved closer, a question finally asked, a child no longer sitting alone.
Years later, when people spoke about Marcus Hill, they rarely mentioned the boy who once sat alone. They spoke about the advocate, the speaker, the man whose calm voice could quiet a room without ever demanding attention. But Marcus never forgot that boy. He carried him quietly, not as a wound, but as a compass, because everything he built later in life pointed back to one simple truth. No child should ever be made to feel invisible. On a warm spring afternoon, Marcus stood at a podium inside a modest auditorium in Baltimore. The banner behind him read, "Educating with Dignity, a Community Conversation." The crowd wasn't large. Teachers, parents, a few students, some retired educators with folded hands and careful eyes. The kind of room where change actually starts. Marcus looked out over them, then down at his notes. He didn't read from them. He rarely did anymore. "When I was 7, he began, "I learned something I carried for a long time." The room stilled. "I learned that being quiet could keep you safe, that not taking up space meant you wouldn't get in trouble, that if you stayed small enough, no one could hurt you.
A few heads nodded. "But here's the thing," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "No child should ever have to earn the right to belong." Silence followed, the listening kind. "I wasn't violent, I wasn't disruptive, I wasn't cruel. I was just different. And instead of curiosity, I was given distance." He paused. "That distance followed me for years." When he finished, there was no standing ovation, just something better. People stayed seated, thinking. Afterward, an older woman approached him slowly. She introduced herself as Linda. "I taught second grade for 32 years, she said, "and I'm realizing now how many children I thought I was helping when I was really just managing." Marcus nodded. "That realization," he said gently, "is where healing begins." That evening, Marcus walked home alone. The city hummed around him. Buses, laughter, sirens in the distance. He passed a playground where children chased one another under the glow of streetlights. One boy lagged behind, watching. Marcus stopped. Then the boy's teacher called out, waving him over. The boy ran, laughing, into the group. Marcus smiled to himself. Small moments, big meaning. Across town, Eleanor Whitaker sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. She was 81 now, her movements slower, her hearing softer, but her mind sharp enough to remember every face that ever sat in her classroom, especially one. She hadn't spoken publicly since her retirement, hadn't attended panels or written essays, but she'd been watching, learning. One afternoon, she pulled out an old box from the back of her closet. Inside were lesson plans, report cards, photographs, and a class picture from years ago. She found him instantly. Marcus, second row, end seat, too far from everyone else. Eleanor traced the edge of the photo. "I thought I was doing my job," she whispered. She folded the picture and placed it back. Then she did something she'd never done before. She wrote, not to Marcus, to the school board, to the teacher training colleges she once lectured at. She wrote about silence, about assumptions, about how harm doesn't always come with cruelty. Sometimes it comes with policy. Her letters didn't go viral. They didn't need to. They landed in the hands of people who still had the power to shape classrooms, and that was enough. Months later, Marcus received an invitation. A small elementary school in his hometown had renamed its reading room. They wanted him there. He almost said no, but something told him to go. The room was bright. Books lined the walls. Cushions covered the floor. A sign above the door read, "The Belonging Room." The principal cleared her throat. "We wanted to create a space," she said, "where no child feels alone, ever." She turned to Marcus. "Your story reminded us why." Marcus didn't trust his voice. He simply nodded. Later, a little girl tugged on his sleeve. "Mister," she asked, "did you really sit alone?" He crouched down to her level. "Yes," he said honestly. She thought about that, then smiled. "Well," she said, "you don't have to anymore." Something in Marcus's chest cracked open, not painfully, but completely. That night, he called his sister. "I think," he said quietly, "this is what it feels like when something comes full circle." Years earlier, something had been taken from a little boy. Trust, ease, the belief that he was welcome just as he was. But life, slowly and imperfectly, had given something back. Not the same thing, something stronger. Purpose, perspective, the ability to see the unseen. Marcus never claimed to be healed. Healing, he learned, wasn't a finish line. It was a practice, one conversation at a time. One child noticed, one chair moved closer. And somewhere in classrooms across the country, children who might have once been pushed to the edges now sat among their peers, laughing, learning, belonging. That was the legacy. Not bitterness, not revenge, but a quiet correction. a reminder that what we take from a child can echo for decades, and what we give back can change generations.